A simple act of kindness fixed a broken wheelchair and changed a lonely mechanic's life forever. Mike Collins wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned over the engine of a beaten-up Ford pickup. At 42, his hands were calloused from years of hard work, but they still moved with the precision of a surgeon when it came to fixing engines. His small auto repair shop sat on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just an honest business that had kept him afloat for 15 years now. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The bell above the door jingled, breaking his concentration. Mike looked up to see a woman, in her mid-30s, pushing a young boy in a wheelchair. The boy couldn't have been more than 8, with leg braces peeking out from beneath his shorts. What caught Mike's attention, though, was the way the wheelchair's right wheel wobbled with each rotation. "Hi there," the woman said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "I'm Sarah, and this is my son Tommy." Mike nodded, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Mike Collins. What can I do for you folks today?" Sarah hesitated, glancing down at the wheelchair. "I know this isn't exactly your specialty, but Tommy's wheelchair keeps locking up. We've been to 3 places already, and they all said we need a replacement. We just can't afford one right now." Tommy looked up at Mike with bright eyes that belied his condition. "Mom says you're good at fixing things." Mike knelt down to examine the wheelchair, spinning the problematic wheel and hearing the grinding noise. "Yeah, the bearing's shot and there's some alignment issues, too." He tapped his chin thoughtfully. "But nothing that can't be fixed." Sarah's face brightened with hope. "Really? How much would the repair cost?" Mike saw the worry lines on her face, noticed the worn edges of her purse, and made a split-second decision. "No charge. This won't take long." Sarah's eyes widened. "I can't let you do that for free. We can pay something." Mike shook his head firmly. "Tell you what, there's a diner across the street. Why don't you two grab some lunch and I'll have this chair running better than new by the time you get back?" Tommy's face lit up. "You're like a superhero for wheelchairs." Mike chuckled as he wheeled the chair toward his workbench. "Just a mechanic. Who knows his way around bearings, kid?" Once Sarah and Tommy left, Mike turned his full attention to the wheelchair. It wasn't just the bearing that needed replacing. The frame showed stress fractures in several places, the result of years of use without proper maintenance. Mike worked with meticulous care, losing track of time as he replaced the bearings, adjusted the alignment, and reinforced the weak spots in the frame. He even added some custom touches, waterproof cushioning for the seat and a small basket attachment on the side. When Sarah and Tommy returned an hour later, Mike was just finishing up, polishing the now gleaming chrome of the wheelchair's handles. "Is it all better?" Tommy asked, excitement evident in his voice. Mike helped the boy back into the chair. "Give it a try." Tommy pushed the wheels and his eyes widened with delight as the chair glided smoothly across the shop floor. "Wow! It's so fast now!" Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears as she watched her son wheel around with newfound freedom. "I don't know how to thank you." Mike shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "It's nothing. Just glad I could help." "It's not nothing to us," Sarah insisted, placing a hand on his arm. "You've given Tommy back his independence. That's everything." As they prepared to leave, Tommy wheeled back to Mike and handed him a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you while we were waiting." Mike unfolded the paper to find a crayon drawing of himself in a cape, standing next to a wheelchair with lightning bolts around the wheels. "It's you as the wheelchair superhero," Tommy explained seriously. Mike swallowed the unexpected lump in his throat. "Best payment I've ever received," he said, carefully tucking the drawing into his shirt pocket. He watched as Sarah and Tommy left, the wheelchair now moving smoothly and quietly. Just another day at the shop, he told himself, turning back to the Ford pickup. 3 days passed. Mike had almost forgotten about the wheelchair repair when he heard the roar of jet engines overhead, unusually close and loud for their small town. He stepped outside his shop and watched in bewilderment as a sleek private jet circled once before, landing at the small municipal airport a mile away. In their town of Oak Ridge, population 8,500, private jets were about as common as snow in July. An hour later, a gleaming black Bentley pulled up outside Mike's shop. The driver, wearing a crisp uniform, opened the rear door to reveal a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, dressed in an impeccable suit that probably cost more than Mike's monthly rent. "Are you Mike Collins?" the man asked, his accent hinting. "At Old Money and East Coast boarding schools." Mike wiped his hands on his rag. "That's me. Something wrong with your car, sir?" The man smiled, shaking his head. "No, Mr. Collins. My name is Robert Jensen. I believe you met my daughter Sarah and grandson Tommy a few days ago." Mike's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Tommy's grandfather? Indeed. May I come in? I'd like to speak with you." Mike led Robert into his cluttered office, hastily clearing a stack of invoices from a chair. "Sorry about the mess. Not used to having, visitors like yourself." Robert waved away the apology. "Mr. Collins, Sarah told me what you did for Tommy, that you fixed his wheelchair for free when everyone else was telling them to buy a new one." Mike shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. The chair just needed some TLC. "It was a very big deal to my family," Robert said firmly. "You see, Sarah lost her husband, my son, 2 years ago. She's been raising Tommy alone, working 2 jobs, to make ends meet. That wheelchair represents Tommy's freedom, his ability to attend school and live a normal life." Mike felt uncomfortable with the praise. "Like I said, anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "I'd like to compensate you properly for your time and expertise." Mike held up his hands. "No, sir, I didn't do it for money." "Which is precisely why you deserve it," Robert insisted. "But I understand if you won't accept payment for yourself." "Perhaps for your business, then? Sarah mentioned this shop has been your life's work." Robert glanced around the modest repair shop. "Mr. Collins, I own a manufacturing company that produces, among other things, mobility equipment for hospitals. We're constantly looking for practical innovations to improve our products." Mike's interest was piqued, despite himself. "What kind of innovations?" "That's exactly what I'd like to discuss," Robert said, leaning forward. "Sarah described the modifications you made to Tommy's wheelchair, reinforcing the frame in key stress points, improving the bearing system, adding the waterproof cushioning. Simple but effective solutions that our engineers, despite their advanced degrees, somehow overlooked." Mike rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "I just applied what I know about engines and machines, nothing special." "That practical knowledge is exactly what's special," Robert countered. "You solve problems our team hasn't been able to crack despite millions in R&D. I'd like to offer you a consulting position with Jensen Medical Technologies." Mike blinked in surprise. "A consulting position? Sir, I'm just a small-town mechanic." "A mechanic who sees solutions where others see only problems," Robert replied. "I'm offering you the chance to help develop the next generation of mobility devices, not just wheelchairs, but all sorts of equipment that could improve the lives of thousands of people like Tommy." Mike sat back, stunned by the unexpected turn of events. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to decide immediately," Robert assured him. "But I do have one immediate request. Would you be willing to fly back with me to Boston just for a few days? I'd like you to meet with our design team and see our facilities. All expenses paid, of course." Mike glanced around his shop, at the half-finished repairs waiting for his attention. "I don't know if I can just leave." "I understand your hesitation." Robert nodded. "But sometimes, Mr. Collins, an act of kindness opens doors we never knew existed. This could be such a door for you." That evening, Mike sat on his porch, nursing a beer as he watched the sunset. The private jet was still at the municipal airport. Robert had given him until morning to decide. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Mr. Collins? It's Sarah Jensen. My father told me he visited you today." Mike smiled. "He did. How's Tommy doing with the wheelchair?" "He hasn't stopped moving since you fixed it." Sarah laughed. "But that's not why. I'm calling. Dad told me about his offer." "Yeah," Mike sighed. "It's quite something." "I know it must seem overwhelming," Sarah said gently. "But I wanted you to know something. When you fixed Tommy's wheelchair, you didn't just repair a piece of equipment. You restored his confidence, his independence, and you showed him that there are still people in this world who will help others without expecting anything in return." Mike was silent, touched by her words. "Whatever you decide about my father's offer," Sarah continued, "I just wanted you to know that you've already made a difference, more than you realize." After they hung up, Mike went inside and pulled out Tommy's crayon drawing from his dresser drawer, where he'd carefully stored it. The childish depiction of himself as a wheelchair superhero made something twist in his chest. He thought about his life in Oak Ridge, comfortable but solitary. His parents were gone, no siblings, no wife or kids. The shop had been his whole world for 15 years, a good world but a small one. Then he thought about the possibilities Robert had laid before him. Not just money, but purpose. The chance to use his skills to help people who truly needed it. Mike picked up his phone and dialed Robert's number. "Mr. Jensen, I've made my decision." The Boston spring morning cast golden light through the floor-to-ceiling. Windows of Jensen Medical Technology's main product testing facility. Mike Collins stood quietly at the back of the room, arms crossed over his chest, watching with a mixture of pride and humility as 20 children tested the new pediatric wheelchair line he had helped design. His life had transformed so dramatically in the past year that sometimes, in quiet moments like this, he still found himself wondering if it was all some elaborate dream. The testing facility resembled a playground more than a laboratory. Colorful. Obstacles, ramps of varying steepness, different floor textures, and even a small water feature had been installed to put the new Freedom Series wheelchairs through their paces. Children ranging from 6 to 14 years old navigated the course, their faces alight with expressions Mike had come to treasure above all else: independence, confidence, joy. A small boy with cerebral palsy zoomed past Mike, executing a perfect turn around a tight corner, his laughter echoing through the room. Mike smiled, noting how the chair's innovative bearing system, based on his original repair of Tommy's wheelchair, allowed for responsive turns without requiring excess upper body strength. The reinforced frame balanced perfectly to distribute weight while minimizing bulk gave the chair's stability without sacrificing maneuverability. But perhaps most revolutionary was the modular design that allowed the chairs to grow with their young users. A simple but transformative idea that had come to Mike during a 3 a.m. brainstorming session in his modest apartment. "They love them," Sarah said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Mike, her eyes crinkling with warmth as she surveyed the room. Now the community outreach coordinator for the Jensen Foundation, Sarah had become more than a colleague over the past year. She was a friend, a confidant, and sometimes Mike suspected a gentle matchmaker trying to introduce him to various female employees. The focus group parents can't stop talking about the adjustable components. Do you know what one mother told me yesterday? She said this is the first wheelchair her daughter has ever been excited about. Not just accepted. Excited. Mike sipped his coffee, oddly moved by this simple statement. In his previous life as a small-town mechanic, success had meant satisfied customers and bills paid on time. Now success was measured in the smiles of children who could navigate their world with greater ease because of something he had helped create. "Uncle Mike!" Tommy's voice cut through his reverie. The boy wheeled toward them at impressive speed, now 9 years old and sporting a new pair of glasses and a Boston Red Sox cap. In the year since Mike had fixed his wheelchair, Tommy had grown 2 inches and gained a confidence that transformed his entire demeanor. "Did you see how fast Jeremy was going in his new chair? He beat his personal best on the obstacle course." Mike grinned, crouching down to Tommy's eye level, a habit he'd developed naturally in their growing relationship. "I saw. Those new bearings are working just like we planned, huh?" "Better," Tommy enthused. "And I told everyone you used to be just a regular car mechanic before you became the wheelchair wizard." Sarah laughed. "Tommy, Mr. Collins is our director of practical innovation now." "Yeah, but Uncle Mike says that's just a fancy title for a guy who tinkers with stuff," Tommy replied with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. Mike couldn't argue with that assessment. Despite the prestigious title, the corner office with a view of Boston Harbor, and a salary that had initially made him choke when Robert presented the figure, at heart he remained a mechanic, someone who identified problems and fixed them with the tools at hand. The difference was that now his fixes improved thousands of lives, not just one car at a time. Robert Jensen approached their small group, immaculate as always in a tailored suit that somehow never showed a wrinkle despite his 14-hour workdays. At 65, Robert possessed the energy of a man decades younger, driven by a mission that had become personal when his grandson had been diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy as a toddler. "There's my star team," Robert said warmly, clapping Mike on the shoulder, a gesture that had initially made Mike uncomfortable, but which he now recognized as Robert's genuine affection. "The board just finished their quarterly meeting. They've unanimously approved your proposal for the adult line. Production starts next month." Mike nodded, still sometimes overwhelmed by how drastically his life had changed. The adult line had been his focus for the past 3 months, a more sophisticated version of the Freedom series designed for adults with mobility challenges. Unlike most wheelchairs on the market that treated adults as simply larger versions of pediatric users, Mike's design acknowledged the different needs, activities, and dignity considerations of adult users. "That's not all," Robert continued, his eyes twinkling with something that looked suspiciously like paternal pride. "The patent office approved your application this morning. The Collins adjustment system is now officially recognized." Sarah squeezed his arm excitedly. "Congratulations, Mike, that's incredible," Tommy whooped, drawing attention from several nearby testers. "Does that mean Uncle Mike is famous now?" "It means," Robert explained patiently, "that Uncle Mike's invention is protected, and his name will be on every wheelchair that uses his special system." Mike felt a surge of pride mingled with disbelief. From fixing one wheelchair for free to having a patented system named after him, all because he'd followed his instinct to help a kid in need. The Collins adjustment system, as the patent now officially named it, was essentially a mechanism that allowed wheelchair users to easily modify their seating position, wheel alignment, and back support without tools or assistance, providing comfort customization that had previously required professional adjustment. "We should celebrate," Sarah suggested. "Dinner tonight? That Italian place in North End you like, Mike?" Before Mike could respond, his phone vibrated with a text message. He glanced down to see it was from Dale, one of the mechanics he'd hired to run his shop back in Oak Ridge. Despite moving his primary residence to Boston, Mike had refused to sell the repair shop that had been his life for 15 years. Instead, he'd hired 2 local mechanics, Dale and Jason, to manage the day-to-day operations while he maintained ownership and visited monthly to keep his hand in the business. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, noticing his expression. "Yeah, just shop business," Mike replied. "Mrs. Abernathy's Buick is acting up again. Dale says they've tried everything we discussed." Robert shook his head with amused disbelief. "Only you would maintain a small-town auto repair shop while revolutionizing mobility technology." "The shop keeps me grounded," Mike explained, not for the first time. "Reminds me where I came from." The truth was more complex than that simple explanation. The repair shop represented security, a fallback if this new life somehow disappeared. Despite his success at Jensen Medical Technologies, despite the patent, despite the friendships he'd formed, part of Mike still couldn't quite believe this was his life now. The shop in Oak Ridge was his anchor to reality, to the person he had been for most of his adult life. Later that afternoon, as Mike prepared to board Robert's private jet for his monthly visit back to Oak Ridge, he paused on the tarmac, looking up at the sky. The spring air carried the scent of new beginnings, appropriate for a man whose life had undergone such profound transformation. A year ago, he'd been a solitary mechanic with a modest shop and modest dreams. Now he divided his time between Boston and Oak Ridge, between innovation and tradition, between his old life and a new one he was still learning to navigate. His apartment in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood remained sparsely furnished, more a place to sleep than a home, while his small house in Oak Ridge still contained the accumulated artifacts of his previous life. Sarah and Tommy had accompanied him to the airport, a tradition they'd established over the past year. Tommy now insisted on hugging Mike goodbye before each trip, a gesture that never failed to touch him deeply. "Bring us back some of those peanut butter cookies from the Oak Ridge Bakery," Tommy requested, his arms wrapped around Mike's waist. Sarah hugged him next, the familiar scent of her perfume, something floral and subtle, momentarily surrounding him. "Call when you land," she instructed, as she always did. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a deep friendship with undercurrents they had yet to fully acknowledge. As Mike settled into his seat on the luxurious private jet, another perk of his position he doubted he'd ever take for granted, he pulled out his tablet to review the latest design modifications for the adult wheelchair line. On the screen's background was the photo taken at last Christmas: Mike, Sarah, Tommy, and Robert, standing in front of an enormous tree at Robert's Beacon Hill mansion, all wearing ridiculous holiday sweaters at Tommy's insistence, a family portrait of sorts, though Mike still hesitated to use that term. The flight attendant offered him a drink as the engines started their powerful hum. "The usual, Mr. Collins. Sparkling water with lime?" "Thanks, Ellie." He nodded, still, slightly embarrassed by the attention. As the jet taxied down the runway, Mike's thoughts drifted to the framed crayon drawing that now hung prominently in his Boston office. Tommy's childish depiction of the wheelchair superhero had become something of a talisman for Mike, a reminder of how an ordinary day and a simple act of kindness had altered the trajectory of his life. The plane lifted smoothly into the air, Boston receding beneath them. Mike closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to reflect. In accepting Robert's offer a year ago, he had stepped into a world he'd never imagined for himself, one of corporate meetings, patent applications, and product launches. Yet somehow he'd managed to remain essentially himself, a man who saw problems and fixed them, who valued practicality over theory, who believed in the dignity of work well done. What had changed was not who he was, but the scope of his impact. His hands still got dirty, now in product testing labs instead of under car hoods, but his work now touched thousands of lives. The wheelchair designs he'd helped create would eventually reach children and adults across the country, perhaps even the world, bringing them the mobility and independence everyone deserved. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Mike opened his eyes and looked out at the clouds below. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness set in motion changes we could never imagine. He had fixed a broken wheelchair, but in return, he'd been given something far more valuable, a purpose beyond himself and a family he never expected to find. The wheelchair superhero had turned out to be real after all,